No Small Endeavor is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
The world's hardest problems can't wait. Food security, energy resilience, the digital divide. I'm Astro Teller. For 15 years, I've worked with inventors and engineers to tackle the seemingly impossible. In the Moonshot podcast, we take you inside X, Google's Moonshot Factory, giving you unprecedented access to the messy, exhilarating journey of turning science fiction into reality. This is the Moonshot Podcast, out now wherever you listen.
I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
Anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of themselves.
That's Sissy Goff, a counselor and author whose work focuses on adolescent mental health.
When we're anxious, our minds are in the past and the future. They're not in the present moment. That was horrible what I did, or oh no, what's going to happen here? But anything sensory related brings us back to the present moment.
Today, counsel for parents raising children, for children struggling with mental health issues, or for anyone simply looking for good wisdom on how to navigate the particular challenges of the world in which we find ourselves these days.
We are doing kids a disservice when we're pathologizing normal emotions.
All coming right up. I'm Lee C. Camp. This is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life. I love the interviews we've been privileged to do with most all of our guests, and then there are a few from which I walk away thinking, oh me, I am so glad we get to share that with the world, and I also personally need to go back and listen carefully to all the wisdom I just heard shared in that past hour. Today is one of those especially special interviews. My lovely wife, Laura, and I have raised 3 beautiful young men, of whom we're so proud and love so much. And it's also no news to anyone that raising children is no small endeavor. It's often hard work, sometimes exhausting. On occasion, it's terrifying. Mix that in with the fact that we are living in a rapidly changing world, and the levels of anxiety, the particular challenges kids face, and the questions to which parents must seek sane answers. All of these are quickly on the rise. Our guest today has some poignant and wise counsel in response to these challenges. Sissy Goff is the author of 13 books full of practical parenting counsel with titles like Raising Worry-Free Girls, Braver, Stronger, Smarter, and The Worry-Free Parent. She's been counseling kids and families for over 30 years and is currently working on a new project about building resilience. And today she shares with us all kinds of possibilities for cultivating relationships and homes in which our children may flourish. And there are plenty of takeaways for adults and their relationships too. Here's our interview with Sissy Goff. Welcome, Sissy.
Thank you so much for having me, Lee.
Been very much looking forward to getting to be with you.
Me too.
And we just discovered we're like literally neighbors.
Yes, just a street over.
I'm so pleased to know that.
Me
now.
too.
Yes.
I'm going to wave at you when I'm walking my dog back.
And we appreciate you welcoming us to your home here. So
Well, I'm
in your
honored,
book
John.
room. I'm so excited about someone having a book room like this.
Some old books in this room.
Yes, a lot can happen in a book room.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, your new work perhaps coming out at some point soon on resilience in children. Give us kind of a frame for thinking about the context in which children might be struggling with resilience in new ways today.
There are a lot of contexts, I think, for where they're struggling with resilience. And to have been doing this work over 30 years, that is one of my primary concerns and why we're working on this currently. And I mean, I think it's several things. One is we're seeing more anxiety than we've ever seen in kids. It's now 1 in 4 children, 1 in 3 adolescents. Girls are twice as likely as boys to deal with it. Boys are actually taken to get help more, which is really interesting. And 1 in 3 adults, and women are twice as likely. And so it is rampant culturally. And out of that, we're seeing trends with kids, but we're also seeing trends with parents that we can talk about too. So anxiety is a piece of it. I would say the pandemic. I think as adults, we feel like we've moved on, but kids haven't. And we're seeing more kids who struggle to have flexibility. We just didn't have to have a lot of flexibility during that. And kids who out of that, I think, don't tap into their own resilience, don't even know that it's there because they're just stuck in these ruts. And kids who have more social anxiety post that too. We've even seen, Lee, kids who, if you were to look at development across the lifespan, who are really a stage behind in their development because of all the things they missed during that. So that the world today where we are, technology is a piece of it. And there's so many different aspects we could talk about in the lives of kids and in the lives of parents that are contributing.
So I want to talk about anxiety, but let's postpone that for just a moment and just kind of ask the practical question of, what do you see as practical ways parents can help facilitate resilience in kids?
So statistically, from a parent standpoint, if parents have anxiety, their kids are 7 times more likely to deal with it. And the research says the two primary coping strategies for anxiety for parents dealing with kids are escape and avoidance. So it feels like good parenting. My child comes upon this distressing event and I'm going to pull them out. And I've written several books on anxiety at this point, and kind of the layperson's definition I came up with is that anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of themselves.
I love that definition. Say it one more time.
Anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of themselves. And so if a child comes upon this difficult situation, they need to do something hard, and the parent rescues them, they're in fact really saying, you're right. You are too small. It is too hard. Never what a parent would intend to communicate, but that's what we do end up communicating to them. That's what it translates for kids. And so one of the things I love to say to parents is, I want you to think of 2 things you're doing for your kids right now, whatever they are, even college age kids. What are 2 things you're doing for them right now that they can do for themselves? And what are 2 things you're doing for them that they can almost do for themselves? And I want you to stop doing all 4.
All 4.
Because that's the thing. Kids only learn that they're capable by experience. And so they've got to do the hard things.
Yeah, that's great. A number of years ago, I read some of Kelly McGonigal's work at Stanford on willpower.
Yes.
And I was fascinated. I'm pretty sure it was Kelly McGonigal who talked about variable heart rate and the ability to deal with stresses and anxiety. And that, if I remember correctly, she said the only known physiological marker they have for predicting your persistence and or willpower is variable heart rate. So literally doing cardio exercise might be one of the most important things you can do. So I tell my students sometimes, especially those who are especially uber spiritual, that maybe the better thing for them to do is go out and get some cardio rather than to pray again this morning. Because it literally might transform their capacity to deal with anxiety or to facilitate resilience. But does that resonate in any way with your experience or things that you've read or researched?
I think it certainly could, because I feel like our nervous systems are all tied together, and heart rate is certainly a piece of that. And we know impacts the blood flow and the amygdala, and which is so much of the center of anxiety.
What do you see as the long-term risks associated with lack of resilience?
I think more anxiety. What I saw firsthand counseling during the pandemic was so many kids who, as that started, had higher rates of anxiety than ever before. I think left untreated and in a world that felt wildly out of control, it spilled over into a lot of depression. And so I think there's this sense of, I'm not capable to do hard things, and that just is going to create more and more of a decline in their mental health.
I'm fascinated with this conversation, for one, because I experienced anxiety a great deal as a kid. And so I have kind of looked with some sort of longing of thinking, I wish I could have known some of these things that took me a long time to learn about anxiety. And it also gives me a bit of anxiety to think about the ways in which I unwittingly passed on my own anxiety to my kids, and in the ways in which probably my mother probably passed on unknown anxiety to her. But what other kind of additional mechanisms, coping strategies, practical skills do you find helpful to teach in dealing with anxiety?
I would say just a lot of emotional regulation. That's one of the things that feels like it's missing so much with kids today. Thinking about a 1 to 10 scale of where our emotions go, and we're just seeing more kids than ever who live at 10. And some of that's anxiety, some of it's anger at times. I mean, it's being told no. There's all manner of reasons kids blow up to 10 and past it sometimes. And so I would love for every family at some point around the dinner table for everyone to come up with their 10 favorite coping strategies. And they're hung up in the house somewhere that we know we can look at a feelings chart, and we know we can take 3 deep breaths, and we know we can play these grounding games that help bring us back to the present moment.
What are some of yours in addition to the ones you just said?
Well, breathing is probably my primary.
Yeah.
It's my favorite when I'm frustrated or when I'm starting to feel anxious. So anything, especially when we're anxious, our minds are in the past and the future. They're not in the present moment.
Yeah.
That was horrible what I did, or, oh no, what's going to happen here? But anything sensory related brings us back to the present moment. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So tell me 5 things you see. Tell me 4 things you hear. Tell me 3 things you feel, not emotionally, but from a tactile sense. Tell me 2 things you smell and 1 thing you taste. And kids love to do that.
I've never heard of that. Yeah.
If I were to get you to do it right now, especially the taste and smell, you do have to focus, and it brings you back to the moment. So that's one of my favorite ones.
That's a great one. I had one friend who used to talk about how he would pay special attention just to the sensation of his watch on his wrist when he was going into a difficult situation, because he found that would bring him into the moment.
That's so interesting.
And on breathing, I remember years ago, I think I've said this before in another interview, but years ago, I remember calling a mentor of mine, and I was really emotionally distraught about something. I don't remember what it was. So I told him what it was and told him what I was feeling. So I was, wanting some feedback. And he said, well, I think the first thing I would tell you is to breathe. And I thought, that's what you've got for me? Come on. But I think that was the first time that someone had pointed out to me, pay attention to your breath.
Oh.
And then subsequently, I actually read some fascinating books. James Nestor's book, Breathe, I find just super fascinating. I think that book changed me in helping me become aware of breathing in a way that I never had before. I've also done some wacky stuff with the Wim Hof breathing. I don't know if you know Wim Hof, but he's a fascinating character that does a lot on cold exposure and a particular way of breathing that has taught me a lot. But what else have you seen with as far as breathing or any sort of other physical, tactile realities that help with this?
Well, one other thing I have that is one of my favorite sensory related that I use a lot at night, and I think any of us laying in bed is when we can get most anxious, and it's called the 3 doors technique. And so you think of 3 places that you love and feel really safe. And again, this is one we do with kids all the time, but like I said, I do it. So 3 places you love, feel safe, and know well. And so I might pick, I went to a summer camp in Texas for 6 summers that I adored, or maybe I'd pick Disney World or a grandparent's house. And you picture yourself walking in the door. Think about, what do you see looking every direction? What do you hear? What do you smell? Again, sensory. And we walk through the whole location, come out, go in the second door, do the same thing. And so many kids will say to me, I never make it to the 3rd door. I always fall asleep first.
I love that.
That's a sweet way to fall asleep.
That's great. That's great. You've done a lot of work with the Covenant community after the horrific shooting at the Covenant School. What kind of commentary would you give on just simply the ways in which these horrific social dangers are pressing in on kids? Do you see that a lot? Are they aware of these things that maybe we weren't as kids, or what's that like?
It's really interesting. It's both. I mean, definitely in the Nashville community, I feel like anxiety rose exponentially with kids all over the city. And we just did a Zoom call with a church in California after the wildfires, and same, kids were more anxious, more aware. And at the same time, I remember the day of the shooting being at the Daystar house, our office, and a mom coming in and saying she talked to her son and said, how are you? Are you okay? And he said, Mom, this is a part of our life. It was just heartbreaking that that's even the case. And so I think it's both. I do think they're more anxious. They're more aware of it. We're preparing them for it, which I think we hear that and we think that's horrible for kids to have these active shooter drills. And at the same time, they need to be prepared. And one of the best ways to ward off anxiety is to anticipate anxiety. And so helping teach them what to do makes them feel more in control as they start to get anxious about these things. And then the other thing I would say, Lee, that feels so important as we think about that, because it is such a different world, is that parents, grandparents who are trusted, anybody that's close to a child that has a significant voice in their life, I want those people to set themselves up early to be the source. I'm always going to tell you the truth, age appropriately. You can ask me questions. I'm going to respond, again, truthfully and age appropriately. But where we have a really connected foundation of trust, so they know they can talk to you about anything that sounds scary.
Yeah. I love that line you just gave us. The best way to ward off anxiety is to anticipate anxiety. Yeah. Which it seems like we often try to do quite the opposite with our kids, is to protect them from the anxiety, right?
Yes.
But you're saying actually we can help them more by kind of leaning into the fact that this is the way things are.
Yes. At any age. I mean, I think we don't prepare kids for how hard things are going to be. And I have a book for adolescent girls, and I spend 2 pages saying 7th grade is hard for everyone. You know, you're never going to find a perfect friend. And, you know, there's going to be hard things in this world. We're going to have trouble.
Yeah.
Period. And really science backs up those kind of ideas when we can prepare them and say, it's going to be hard to start kindergarten and you're going to miss your mom and dad. And here's what we're going to do as you go into that. By the way, your freshman year of college is going to be one of the loneliest times in your life. You're going to have a ball and it's going to be really lonely. But when we say this is going to be the best time ever, sometimes we set them up to think something's wrong with me, because I think that's where kids go into fault sometimes.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our conversation with Sissy Goff. I love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. You can get show notes for this episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in this episode, as well as a PDF of my complete interview notes and a full transcript. We also have a free bi-monthly newsletter in which I riff on themes and behind-the-scenes goings-on called the NSE Notebook. You can subscribe to that newsletter for free by going to our website at nosmallendeavor.com/newsletter. Coming up, Sissy and I discuss why letting children experience scary, hard things fosters their resilience, advice about kids using technology, and the ways we may overuse the language and constructs of mental health. How can we, in fact, as parents or as a community, go on and lean into what you were just saying, that life is hard and a lot of people get protected from it. And then when it breaks through in their neighborhood, now they can't pretend like the world is simple or naively nice, right? But instead have to face the facts that the world is oftentimes a dangerous and difficult place. So I don't know, comments, feedback, or any commentary on any of that?
Well, I think that's, again, where, as you said, life is also sometimes a dangerous place.
Yeah.
I think we want to teach kids that. We want to talk about that with kids. But that's not the end of the story.
Yeah.
That's not what wins. And they're not alone in the midst of it. And so I think, again, that idea of being truth tellers, age appropriately. I mean, we don't say that to a 3-year-old. And we do say it to a 6-year-old, potentially based on their experience. And so just that we're kind of in lockstep with them and very aware of what's going on in their worlds. You know, that was one of the things we talked to parents about after the Covenant shooting. Ask your kids what they've heard. What do they know? And then respond accordingly. Because sometimes, I mean, even when we're thinking about talking to kids about sex, sometimes our own anxiety drives the conversation.
Yeah.
And we give them more information. And kids have this remarkable innate sense of they ask for the questions that they're ready for the answers.
Huh.
And if they don't ask, they're not ready. Typically.
Yeah, fascinating. It does seem like and you've already kind of at least alluded to this, there's this sort of balance between being overprotective out of our anxiety for our kids and then under preparing them on the other hand. It's like there are these realities that are dangerous and difficult that I hear you saying at age-appropriate ways. We do better to lean in and say, yeah, this is the way the world is. But at the same time, it's fascinating. I think a lot of people would know this, but I was looking this up again today, that according to the FBI, the violent crime rate has fallen 49% between 1993 and 2022.
Well, that's amazing.
It is amazing.
Wow, I did not know that.
And a lot of people are unaware of this.
Wow.
But it's been a very long trend that the rates of violent crime has just dropped dramatically in the United States. But I think the way we think about it is that you're crazy to let your kid walk around the neighborhood. Now, when we were kids, it was fine to walk around the neighborhood.
Right.
But these days, you're crazy. But statistically, that's just not true. So yeah, it does always seem like there's this balance of saying, okay, yeah, life can be hard, but also not to get overly anxious and to project our fears upon the world.
Right, exactly. And that sense of free play is so good for kids.
Yeah.
So important.
Right. One last thing on anxiety before we move on. One of my favorite coping mechanisms is that I started in our church context, in my high school and so forth, and then on into college. I started doing public speaking as a very young person. I think I did my first sermon in our little church in Alabama when I was 13 or 14.
Did
something
you
like
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
But I would get so terrified that on a number of occasions I would throw up. But then finally, after I must have been in my 30s when I read something that said that the wiring in us that creates what we call nervousness and the wiring that creates what we call excitement is the same wiring. And that you can actually identify that feeling of butterflies or that feeling of that we might call anxiety or we might call worry in a setting like that and simply reframe it and say, oh, I've got this extra energy to do this well now.
Wow.
And there have been these studies where they take students and ask them simply to tell themselves before they do an exam that butterfly feeling that I have, that's extra energy for me to do better on this exam. And they do better.
Really?
Statistically on the exam, simply by reframing it. Isn't that fascinating?
Wow, that is fascinating.
Yeah. So the stories that we tell ourselves about
matter.
Our experience, this just matters so much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Which, if as a parent, you are helping your kids all along the way say, things like that. This is great extra energy for you.
Yeah.
And you can do hard things. You've got all that energy and you feel anxious because you care.
Yeah.
And because it matters. How empowering for you.
I love hearing you say the do hard things because that's another thing I've been doing with college students for years now is even in one of my classes, they had a daily assignment to do something hard every day.
Did they really?
Yeah. And it was amazing how that can transform a life, And even I did a series on this with some older professionals, and as they began to do something hard every day, there were some remarkable stories about as they built up that capacity to do something hard every day, then they did some really hard things that they had been postponing for years that they needed to deal with. Wow. And then they finally found their way to deal with it. So I love hearing you talk about that importance of learning to do hard things.
Yes.
So let's talk about parenting then in the rapidly changing world in which we find ourselves. And it does seem that in many ways today's kids are growing up in a world that's qualitatively different from past generations. What are some of the biggest shifts you see in addition to anything that we've talked about already?
The most glaring to me is technology.
Yeah.
At such young ages that is impacting kids so significantly. And thankfully, the anxious generation, I think, is starting to get our attention in a way that nothing has that I've encountered.
You mean there's the book by Jonathan Haidt?
Yes, Jonathan Haidt, yeah. That has, we know it statistically and anecdotally, I see all the time the impact of that on anxiety and depression in kids and social media as well. And so I think that is one of the biggest concerns I have societally today. And then, I think school shootings is another of the biggest, as we've talked about. And that probably feels closer to home for us because it's our literal neighborhood.
Right. So on technology, what are some things that you're finding that seem to be helpful in parent-child relationships and navigating some of that?
Well, that's a great question because I feel like I have been struck in the last 2 months. I have had 2 girls who have been pushing hard to get cell phones, middle school girls, and their parents said no and held them off until 8th grade, one until 9th grade. And it was interesting because in my office, now those girls were manipulating their moms like crazy.
Yeah.
In my office, they said, I don't really care. I know she's doing it for my best interest. And I think kids feel like they have to push because it feels like my social acceptance is dependent on me also sitting at the birthday party with a phone.
Yeah.
As is everyone else, or walking outside of the school building and we all pick up our phones immediately. And so I think they have to push for it. And at the same time, I don't think they're ever going to say, oh, yeah, I really agree with you on I think we should hold off on this. But I do think as long as we possibly can. My rule of thumb usually with parents is when they're talking about whatever technological advancement kids are asking for, whether it's a device or it's social media, that you don't want to be the first because then often your kids are going to be perceived as fast and we don't want our kids to be fast. You don't want to be the last because our job is to teach them to handle this responsibly. And if we hold off and don't ever do it, not only do I think we're maybe setting up a little more social struggle, but I also think we're not teaching them when we can help them pick up the pieces. And so I say to parents often, I want you to be the next to last. I mean, really listen to everybody in your child's class. And when it feels like almost everyone has jumped on board, then it's time.
Fascinating. Strive to be next to last.
Yeah. Yes.
I must say, I increasingly, and I sound like an old man here with saying this, but I increasingly, walking around campus, I've started counting how many undergrads will pass me staring at their phone. I keep consistently getting about a 2-to-1 ratio are walking around looking at their phone, either looking at their phone or holding their phone in their hand. And I just feel really sad about it.
Yeah.
Because I feel like you're missing out on these beautiful human beings around you, and you're missing out upon all of these brilliant faculty members around you that you could be having a relationship with. And you only get a very short window of time to have relationships with these people. But another thing that I've seen is that office hours is almost like a ancient relic because almost nobody comes anymore.
Wow.
Whereas used to, when I started teaching, people would stop by your office just all the time, but it just doesn't seem to happen anymore.
To ask for help or just to have relationship,
Exactly.
probably.
Yeah. Right. And so it is such a different world. What about climate change? You hear much about that from students?
Some, I hear probably more social justice issues in a really great way. I mean, I would say in 30 years of working with kids, I've never heard kids as motivated to make a difference in places they feel like are important as I am in the last 3 to 5 years, which I think is amazing.
It is amazing.
And we know, even thinking about anxiety and depression, I think one of the best things kids can do is experience a sense of purpose and meaning. And so the fact that both of those things are coming together is fantastic for kids.
Let's say you had a young person that comes to you and they have a kind of deep sensitivity to some sort of social justice issue. What would you encourage them to do with regard to trying to foster some sort of sense of purpose or usefulness in the world?
I would encourage them to find places they can make a difference. I mean, as small, which is not small, but I have a lot of kids who choose an issue and start a club at school around that, find a teacher to sponsor them and get going in that direction. And then I have kids who volunteer in different capacities and kids who show up at events to help support different causes. I mean, I am seeing so much evidence of that. And I just have studied a lot more on grief in the last year. And I love that David Kessler is talking about a 5th stage of grief that is meaning. And so even thinking about as we're grieving changes in the world, and kids are, for all of us to be moving towards that, I think ends up helping us feel some semblance of control, but also brings us hope and directs us towards the light that hopefully is there.
What in particular got you paying a special attention to grief?
The Covenant shooting.
Yeah.
And I lost my own mom 5 years ago. And so just felt more like I was wanting to help parents, help kids navigate that.
How would you see the work that you have done as autobiographical? That is, what were the experiences that you had as a young person that made you especially interested in doing what you've done?
Well, I think I'm probably older than you, a lot older than you. But when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, I didn't know a person in counseling. I mean, no one was talking about it. If they were, I'm sure there were people in counseling, but no one said it out loud. No one was passing feelings charts around their dinner table. A lot of the things, thankfully, that we're doing in this day and time to teach kids an emotional vocabulary, healthy processing of emotions. And I wish I had had someone. I was the kind of kid who smiled all the time. I was very active in a lot of faith-based groups. And I probably looked like I really had it together on the outside. And things were hard, some on the inside, as they are for every kid. And no one ever said to me, Sissy, no one smiles all the time. Tell me what's really going on. And so I would say that kind of led me step by step to wanting to help people, wanting to help kids. And then that I would give a lot of credit, which this was a big phenomenon in the 70s and 80s, soap operas. For whatever reason, my generation, we got to skip school. Our parents let us skip school to watch soap operas for a thing. And there was a woman named Marlena on Days of Our Lives who literally is the first child psychologist I ever heard of. Isn't that funny?
That's fascinating.
So at 17, I thought, well, that sounds like a cool career. So you never know what God will use to orchestrate your path.
Yes.
But
yeah, that sort of faux cheerfulness is something that I also had to deal with growing up. And I think the first time I ever had anyone suggest that I should examine that was a college friend of mine. And I don't remember the exact context, but I just remember him saying something like, Lee, it's okay. You don't have to be cheerful all the time. And maybe you can just not be okay. And it would be okay for you not to be okay. Something like that.
wow.
And I just thought, wow, that sounds like something I need to attend to.
Yes. Isn't that interesting?
It's very interesting. But, I think so often we can kind of, in well-meaning ways, I mean, it's better to lean into cheerfulness, I suppose, than being dour.
Yes.
But to make space for being okay with other feelings, which I suppose is a huge part of what you do with kids a lot of times.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else in your particular autobiographical experience that has contributed to what you've been able to do?
That's a good question. I think one of the things I've learned as an adult is it feels like nothing's wasted. And so it does feel like so many of the places I involved myself and the doors that open to me are in a different capacity when I'm doing still, which I love. I mean, I say to parents a lot at parenting seminars, the things that are so silly, but at the same time that you so don't want your children to experience. I mean, I didn't make cheerleading. This is a silly part of my autobiographical. At 54, it's a silly part of it. At 7th grade, it was not a silly part. And when I didn't make cheerleading was the first time I was offered a leadership position and started to step into these organizations and places where I experienced purpose and making a difference. And not that I wouldn't have felt purpose as a cheerleader, but I very much believe that part of me sitting here with you today and getting to do the work that I do is because I didn't make cheerleading, as silly as that is. So the things that sometimes when we love kids and we're trying to prevent them from experiencing or think is going to crush them becomes the very conduit to them getting to do what they were made to do.
We're going to take a short break, but coming right up, more key parenting practices, the danger of pathologizing normal emotions, and Sissy's practices which help her continue to do her work in the world. Hello, friends. One of the things I've taught students for many years now is that one of the most important things they can do is pay attention to their meta habits, big habits that leave lots of things in their wake, and that this is key to living life well. For centuries, the cardinal virtues were thought of as just such meta habits, profound practices that have a disproportionately large impact upon your life. The 4 cardinal virtues: courage, temperance, prudence, and justice. They were considered essential to a good life, but today we hardly talk about them. Most people can't even name them. That's why we're launching a special 4-part series exclusively on NSE+. In this series, I'll take a deep dive into these virtues, what they mean, why they matter, and how they shape a meaningful life. Think of it like a private college course, except it's way practical. Episode 1 on courage is out now. We explore why courage is not fearlessness, but the ability to face fear wisely, and how practicing courage can change your life. Join us on NSE Plus to start listening today. Sign up at nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSE Plus. Before we move on from parenting, what are other key parenting practices that you regularly find yourself going back to in counseling parents?
I would say one is problem solving, as basic as that is, that it's not only letting them do the hard things, but it's us communicating through questions that we believe they're capable of figuring them out and doing them. Because I think when we say, that sounds really hard, what do you think would help? Just that question implies capability.
Right.
It means I think
That's
you can
great.
figure it out.
Yeah.
And so we talk a lot about this magic formula of empathy and questions, and that we always start with, because we want to always be attuned to where they are emotionally. That does sound tough, or that would have made me sad too, or wow, I would feel frustrated. And what do you think is the right thing to do? Or what's your heart telling you to do? Or however we ask that question, that we're throwing it to them, and then we listen, and they may give a wonky answer, and that's okay.
Yeah.
They'll figure it out.
Right. Other major parenting practices you keep coming back to?
Empathy and questions, letting them do hard things. I think another would be one of my favorite super practical things is I want every family, because as we were talking about with anxiety, one of the things that happens, and talking about breathing, is, when we get anxious, our amygdala takes over, which is the part of our brain that dictates fight and flight. And when it does, the blood flow shifts away from the prefrontal cortex, which helps us think rationally and manage our emotions. And there is something I believe that happens, and I don't know this from a scientific standpoint, but it feels like in a home, when one person's amygdala gets tripped, all of a sudden everybody in close proximity does too. And so
I don't have the foggiest idea what you're talking about.
So I love when families have a word that if I say watermelon, that means we're going to pause the conversation right here. Because when my amygdala is acting out and yours is we're not getting to a helpful place. If I'm trying to ask you a question, I'm trying to tell you something, even if I'm trying to give you a consequence, in that moment, no child is going to really think through logically what's happening, because their brain is not online in a way it's capable of doing that. So when I say watermelon and we each go look at our coping strategies and we take 5 minutes or 15 minutes and then come back together, we can get to a helpful place.
I love that. That's fascinating. It's also remarkable about how much stuff can be going on that we're oblivious to unless somebody helps us see it.
Yes.
And just that simple description of the fact that the part of our brain that is supposed to keep us rational and restrained,
yes,
that literally, physiologically, blood is shunted away from that part of our brain when the amygdala, the fight or flight stuff gets triggered.
Yes.
If we can somehow remember that, then all of a sudden the pause makes huge amounts of sense.
Right. Rather than, don't you walk away from me.
Right.
Which is, easy to do.
Is there any other way in which you see parents unintentionally passing on anxiety to their kids that we haven't mentioned so far?
One is, I think I'm seeing a lot of parents overcompensate for what they didn't grow up passing feelings charts around. They didn't grow up talking and having these healthy, robust conversations about emotions. And so now I'm going to pay so much attention to my child's emotions that I pay more attention to their emotions than their resilience or their capability. And so, for example, I was at the daycare house not long ago, and I had a little girl who came to meet me for anxiety, and she was 8. The average age of onset used to be 8. Now we're seeing it drop to 6 with signs as young as 4 and 5. And I knew that's why she was there. And I came downstairs to get her, and I greeted her in the lobby. You can tell I have this really big smile, and I waved at her, and she waved back at me, and I walked over and introduced myself and said, I'm going to take you on a tour of the daycare house. And then we're going to go upstairs and meet my little dog named Lucy, who was my dog before Patches, who's sitting here. And she's going to love you. And this precious little girl popped up to follow me, and her mom grabbed her arm and stopped her and said, "Do you feel comfortable with that?" She had her there to meet with me for counseling. I'm not sure why she didn't think her daughter would feel, or it was even safe for her to come with me. And I took the daughter, spent some time with her. This mom sat across from my door the whole time I was with her daughter. And then I brought the mom in and said, "Tell me about your family history." And she said, "Well, I had anxiety when I was growing up, and my parents never understood what was going on with me. And so now I'm determined to understand her." And so in the anxiety books, I break it down in understanding, help, and then hope. And I think she was doing a beautiful job with the understanding, but not moving her towards help and practical coping strategies, which is what she needed so much of. And I think for a lot of us, when we felt like our parents didn't understand us, that's where we can get really stuck. And then kids don't see, I'm capable. We don't want to be the rub dirt in it and keep going.
Yeah.
But we sacrifice, I think, one for the other. And one of the things that I think it's so important for parents to know is whatever we pay the most attention to is what we're reinforcing. And so if we are paying more attention to their anxiety, I had a girl one time say to me, "My mom is more nurturing to me when I have panic attacks than any other time." So if we're paying more attention to that, then again, their resilience, we want to pay attention to both because we want them to know we're with them and we care and that they're capable.
How did you say that? What we pay attention to?
Whatever we pay the most attention to is what's most reinforced.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, super helpful. Any one common misconception about child mental health you wish folks understood better or more?
Well, it probably ties into what we were just talking about, but one concern I have that I think becomes a misconception maybe is that I think all corrections can lean towards being overcorrections. And in this swing to helping kids name their feelings, I do believe kids are overdiagnosing themselves. And like I said, TikTok is a huge proponent of that. And I mean, it is all manner of issues that they come in describing, I think, waiting for us to diagnose them or agree with their diagnosis. But I had a parent who met with me a year ago who said her 7th grade daughter, as we're joking about 7th graders, her 7th grader daughter had something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Which, who doesn't in 7th grade? You know, we all did, if we're being honest. And I think we are doing kids a disservice when we're pathologizing normal emotions. Even anxiety. David Thomas, my coworker and friend, tells a story about a boy who was going to ask a girl out to a homecoming dance. And his mom was driving him and he said, I'm just having trouble breathing. I think I'm having a panic attack. And she said, "Honey, you're nervous. Of course you're nervous. And that's good. That's okay. Anybody would be in this situation." And there's really two things happening. I mean, we're seeing anxiety and depression and all those things rise with kids, but we're also seeing this sense of using this big language to describe normal emotions that I think is honestly dangerous for kids. And I think we're jumping on board. I lead a group of high school girls every week, and I asked them not long ago how they felt like kids were defining themselves today. And they said all the things, you know, popularity, activities you're involved in, grades, all the things we've always defined ourselves by. And this one girl said, "I think we're defining ourselves by mental health issues." And she said, it's one of the first things we talk about when we get to be friends with each other is I have anxiety or I have depression. And she was brilliant. And she said, it bothers me for two main reasons. One is I think it makes us think more about the negative than the positive. And two, we're taking away the power of those words for people who really are experiencing them.
Okay, so let me come back to a personal question about the way in which you put into practice rhythms of life for yourself that help you stay in a place of flourishing. So what have you learned from all the work that you've done that you as an adult say that this is part of my daily or weekly or monthly, quarterly routine for maintaining my own well-being?
A few things. One is the Enneagram has been very helpful to me. I know you've had conversations with Suzanne Stabile, who I love. She just came and spoke to our staff. And I think it has I'm a 1 on the Enneagram.
Yeah, me too.
You are?
I am.
It's hard to be a 1.
It is hard to be a 1.
Yes.
We can pathologize that, can't we?
Yes. Yes. And I think we can work so hard and not, because we're so hard on ourselves, not give ourselves room to do the things that we need to do. And one of the most helpful strategies for me has been learning my signals of when I'm not in a good place.
Huh.
We talk with kids about that too. Notice the signs in your body. And I jokingly say that I get twitchy and bitchy. I just start doing too much too fast, and then I start to get mean.
Yeah.
And I'm an introvert, but I can come off extroverted, but I need a lot of time alone. And I'm still learning at this age to fold in more. It has been so helpful to have a puppy who is wild in the last year, because I have to walk her every day, no matter what. We have to get out and walk. And it has been grace for me to be outside and, and I just have got to do things like that. And I always have to have some dumb TV show that I'm watching that's mindless and it's not really complicated family dysfunction. I can't do that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Anything else in your daily, weekly rhythms?
Reading.
Yeah.
Wine. All those things.
I like both of those as well. Yeah. I usually go for beer instead of wine, but yeah. So with those sorts of practices that you find helpful, what do you find as persistent missteps you keep finding yourself doing in spite of the fact that you may know differently?
I have learned, and as a therapist, I counsel 4 days a week. Now I'm moving into a little bit more administrative, but I used to pack in breakfasts with people because I didn't, I was working all day. And so I can't ever go to lunch with someone. I'm counseling through lunch. And so I would spend time with people in the mornings, and I learned that it drained me. And that probably today still is my biggest misstep, when I feel obligated, feel like I need to do something with someone. I think that causes more damage, is way too strong of a word, but more annoyance is probably how it comes out in me. I don't get to be who I want to be in the world when I let those things encroach on me. Now, I love people and I want to be with people, but I have to be strategic. I don't know if you are familiar with Susan Cain's stuff about introversion and extroversion.
Yes, I love her book, Quiet.
Me too. Yeah. And there's a section in the back about raising introverted children. And then she has a book called Quiet Power for kids.
Huh.
I would be curious if you had a similar story growing up, but my mom would laugh and say that I would have friends over a lot. And then I would go to her and say, when are they going home? And how I interpreted that was whatever friends started getting on my nerves. And no one ever helped me understand the language of, no, you just needed time and space yourself. It wasn't about the other person. And that is one of my biggest lessons I've learned in life as an adult. And I'm so grateful that we're learning about introversion younger. And so we can help kids understand that too.
Yeah. What gives you hope for this season in which we find ourselves with kids?
I might go back to that idea of, I think kids want to make a difference more than I've ever seen. And that kids are more thoughtful, and I believe kids long to be more independent than we're giving them space to be sometimes. And so I see a lot of potential in a way that they're kind of trying to create their own elbow room to make meaning for their lives and purpose for their lives and feel like they can do hard things.
Yeah. Been talking to Sissy Goff, Executive Director at Daystar Counseling Ministries in Nashville, Tennessee. Also the author of 13 books, as well as the co-host of the podcast Raising Boys and Girls. Thank you, Sissy, for the delightful time here at your home.
Thank you for having me, Lee.
Yeah, thank you for
It's been so fun.
your generosity with your time, and thanks for the good work you're doing in Nashville and well beyond with all your books and your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with Sissy Goff, counselor, author, and co-host of the podcast Raising Boys and Girls. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carriet Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Audrey Griffith, and Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.